Okay, we are on Sefer Chafetz Chaim, Klal Beis. I just want to finish up something in Halacha Yud Beis. Good morning. Good morning, everyone who's joining us. So we're on 212. We were discussing that, the last thing we discussed was that if you hear a speech from a rabbi, a Torah speech, and you don't like it, you're not allowed to go and tell somebody, oh, that speech was so bad, the rabbi said things that were nonsense, he didn't speak well, kach v'kach. What you really should do is go up to the rabbi if he didn't do such a great job and say, Rabbi, maybe you gave a great speech, but maybe here's some pointers. You could do X, Y, Z. So he adds on the bottom. I didn't mention this last week. He writes, "Im loshenis arv behadrasha in yonim shel apikorsus." This we're speaking about when you're not allowed to speak negatively about the rabbi's speech, is only when he doesn't have in the speech words of apikorsus, which is heresy. Chas v'shalom. U'beish kazeh einon medabrim. We're not talking about a person like this. And he says to look later in Klal Ches Sifhei in chapter 8, which we're not up to yet. But there he says that if someone, here he's talking about if somebody gives a speech, and in the speech he espouses heretical ideas, like he says the Torah wasn't written by God, or he says that he denigrates the oral Torah, says the oral Torah isn't true, that's considered heresy, and the Chafetz Chaim later writes that it's actually a mitzvah to denigrate this person, whether it's in front of him or whether it's behind his back, right? Because we don't want the Jewish people to follow these false ideas. So you're allowed when it's actually a mitzvah when someone's speaking heretical things to denigrate him. Like if he says, God forbid, he says that the story of the Exodus never happened, or other stories in the Torah didn't happen, then it's a mitzvah to denigrate and publicize the apikorsis, the heretical things that he is talking about. And that is something which we will discuss, God willing, in chapter 8. Okay, so let's continue with number 13. We are on, again, 213 in Sefer Chafetz Chaim. Im echad gila lechavero be'apei tlasa, inyan isko umachsero ukiyotzi bezeh. Let's say there's a guy, and again, he's talking in front of three people. Again, feel free to write your questions here, and I'll try to respond after the class. I see there's one question already. I'm going to read it after. But please feel free, as we're writing, to write all your questions. So if you're standing there with three people, and somebody comes and in front of these three people, he says something negative about his business, about himself. He's talking negatively about himself. He says something about his business, which could, if word gets around, it could potentially harm him. And he says it in front of three people about himself. Now, if somebody else would say it about this individual, it would be totally prohibited to repeat it because it's negative information, and this negative information could potentially cause him damage in business. But now, since he revealed this thing about himself in front of three, we see he doesn't care. He is not makpid if this negative information gets around about him, because how do I know? He said it in front of three people. So therefore it's permitted for one of the three listeners to reveal it. So he says that you're allowed to repeat it, but you have to have the conditions we had of apei tlasa. If you remember a few classes ago, we learned that when some negative information is said in front of three people, according to the Rambam, it's allowed to be repeated with certain conditions, even though we don't paskin like it. Those conditions, for example, were you're not allowed to add anything to the story, you're not allowed to make the story worse, you're not allowed to repeat the information because you want to spread Lashon Harah. It can only come out derech agav in the course of your in the course of conversation. You can't go ahead and start spreading it. And it can only be spread within the town. And the Chafetz Chaim made a point earlier that it's very hard to get all of these conditions. So I would imagine that just like over there he mentioned that it's very hard to fulfill all of these conditions, here too it's probably very hard to meet these conditions. So practically, even if someone says Lashon Hara about himself in front of three people, and apparently he doesn't care about it because he said it in front of three people, even in such a case, perhaps it's not the greatest idea to spread it around. Now, the Chafetz Chaim and the Ber Mayim Chaim asked an interesting question on something we mentioned before. He says, it sounds like from here that if someone says negative information about himself, you're not allowed to repeat it. Like, right? In this case that we're discussing, what's the heter? What's the permissive case? someone says something in front of 3 people about himself and it's negative, I'm allowed to repeat it. But if it was just in front of one person, right, Shmuel comes up to me and Shmuel tells me something negative about his business, in that case I would not be allowed to repeat it. So the Ber Mayim Chaim asks from a Gemara in Yuma, which we discussed, right? The Torah says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor." It says God spoke to Moses saying. Why does what's the double speech? Why does it say God spoke to Moses saying? To tell Moses that he's allowed to repeat what God said to him, or he should repeat what God said to him. So we learn from there that if someone tells you something, even if he doesn't say, he's keeping it as a secret, you're not allowed to repeat it. So the Chavetz Chaim asks, from that Gemara, it's apparent that anytime someone tells you anything, you're not supposed to repeat it. But here we see that it's only when someone says something negative about himself, you're not allowed to repeat it. So how do we reconcile? On one case, we have a Gemara which says you're not allowed to repeat anything someone tells you unless he gives you explicit permission. However, over here, it's apparent that you're only not allowed to repeat something when someone tells you privately something negative. But if he tells you something positive about himself, or something which is just parav, you're allowed to repeat it. So how do we reconcile these two laws? So one answer the Chavetz Chaim says is that the Gemara in Yuma is midas chasidus, meaning that according to the letter of the law, when someone tells you something about himself, or he tells you something, even if he doesn't say it's a secret and it's not negative, you're allowed to repeat it according to the letter of the law. However, the pious thing to do is not to repeat it anyway. Right? We always have the letter of the law, what one's required to do, and going above and beyond. So really, one should not repeat it, even though technically he's allowed to do it. Nevertheless, one should not repeat it. Now, if it's something negative, right? If someone tells you in confidence, I'm in a lot of debt and I have this business, so you're not allowed to go repeat that. That's negative. If he just says, I played a great, I love playing racquetball or something, and it's like a very parav thing, so you're allowed to tell people that he likes playing racquetball, or maybe that's like a little ambiguous. If he tells you something in which about himself, you're allowed to repeat it according to the letter of the law, but the midas chasidus is not to. Now, he gives another answer. That's one answer. The second answer is that the Gemara in Yuma, which says that you're not allowed to repeat something, that's only when he doesn't tell you explicitly that it should be kept a secret, but he kind of he pulls you in to like a side room, and he like whispers it to you. He does things which imply that it kind of should be a secret, even though he doesn't say it explicitly. In that case, that's when you're not allowed to repeat it. But in general, it's totally fine to repeat it. And he says that was the case with Hashem and Moshe. Hashem spoke to Moshe in the Ohel Moed, in the tabernacle, which was a private place. So Hashem was Ki'ilu, bringing Moshe. Moshe was inside of the tabernacle, so therefore, since it would look like it was a secret, God had to tell Moshe explicitly, you're allowed to repeat it. So again, what just to summarize these halachas, someone tells you something privately which is negative about himself, forbidden to repeat it. If someone tells you something which is parav about himself, so if he brings you in and makes it like a secret, then it's forbidden to repeat it. And even if not, according to the first answer, you're allowed to repeat it, but still the pious thing to do is to not repeat it. Now, if this fellow says a negative thing in front of 3 people, so apparently he doesn't care if it gets spread around. So if you have all of the conditions that we learned in chapter 2 of the Chavetz Chaim, you're allowed to repeat it. But we mentioned that it's very hard to have all of those conditions, as the Chavetz Chaim mentioned himself in Halacha Yud, in number 10. So something just to keep in mind. And that is the end of chapter 2. Let's start a little bit of chapter 3. 3:1. Kama gadol isur Lashon Harah she'asarta hatayra afilu al emes. See how great the prohibition of Lashon Harah is, that it's prohibited even when speaking the truth. Ubechol gavna, in every situation. Delo mibai imhu shomer es atzmo lesaper alav b'seiser. Of course, it's prohibited. Umakper al zeh shelo yizgalelo da'aser. Mekabel al atzmo gamkin aru kama dechsiv aru makare'ehu b'seiser. Okay, so for sure Lashon Harah is prohibited to speak in private, where you say something negative about a fellow, and you're very careful to make sure that it doesn't get back to that person. That's for sure prohibited, and a person gets cursed over that. There's a curse in the Torah when he does it privately. Ela afilu is actually something a big Talmud Chacham pointed out, that if you look at the curses in the Torah, when the Torah curses certain sins, so why does the Torah curse those sins as opposed to other sins? So if you look, they're all things which could be done in private. like sleeping with certain relatives that one shouldn't sleep with, like one's mother-in-law, things like that. There are things that are done in the privacy of the home that a person thinks he can get away with it. So all of those things where a person thinks that he can get, he's only afraid of other people, and he's not afraid of God because he's doing it in private. Those things specifically are curses, the Torah curses, and it would work out here that that the Torah curses someone who speaks Lashon Hara in private because he's not afraid of Hashem, he's only afraid of other people. But it says, even if a person would say, yeah, I don't care, I don't care if it gets back to this guy that I'm talking about, I would say it to his face, right? We've heard that before. Or even worse, he speaks Lashon Hara in front of the person he's talking about. Gam ken aser, that's also prohibited. For Lashon Hara mikri, it's Lashon Hara. And actually, from another aspect, it's even worse. It might be even worse when you speak Lashon Hara in front of the person. Mishalo b'fanav, the b'fanav levad. The b'fanav levad is a Lashon Hara who malbishes atzmo. He embarrasses the guy. He malbishes ma'ideh ha'azis v'achutzpah. He shows that he's mechutzef. He is audacious. You can't translate chutzpah. He's got chutzpah to speak negatively in front of somebody. And through that, you can embarrass somebody, right? It's one thing to speak Lashon Hara, that's a very bad sin, but to embarrass someone to his face, that's very serious. Like we explained in the introduction, like we explained. So the prohibition of Lashon Hara is in private, and a person gets cursed over that. But it's even worse in public because first he shows that he has chutzpah. It's a very bad attribute to have that negative audacity and chutzpah and not care and just to denigrate someone to their face. It's a very negative trait. And also, one could violate the prohibition of embarrassing somebody, which to embarrass someone in public. It's better to jump into a burning fire than to embarrass someone in public. It's akin to murder. It's a very, very serious sin. Brazenness. Thank you for the right. Chutzpah is brazenness. That's a pretty good translation. Okay, thank you to everyone for joining us, and please stay healthy.